and welcome to Tea and Strumpets, a Regency romance review. I'm Zoe.
And I'm Kelsey.
And Kelsey, I know that you've been more kind of on the periphery than I have because I've just been obsessed since about a month ago with all of the RWA stuff going on. I found it really fascinating, and I don't know if you know this, but Sarah Wendell at Smart Bitches Trashy Books has just this week released a 4-episode podcast series on the reflection of kind of RWA a month later is what she's calling it.
Yes, I did see it, not only from you, but I also saw it from another friend of mine who made sure to send the group a text and say, hey, this is happening. We need to listen to it. I have not had a chance yet to listen to it, but...
Well, I just have to say that I finished listening to it this morning, and I just really appreciate what Sarah did. She got 4 viewpoints from people who have been involved in different ways around this story and everything that's been going on. And she just does a really brilliant job of speaking to these people, asking great questions, and kind of giving the listener a chance to form their own conclusions. And it's nuanced, and it's upsetting, and it's frustrating, and there's moments of hope, and there's moments of despair. And she also speaks with Courtney Milan in the 4th one, who I have said before this podcast is my favorite author. And since doing this podcast, she's definitely still up there for me, but now I'm like, my mind is expanded and I don't know how I could just pick one. But really, it is kind of an incredible thing to have always loved someone because of their writing, and then to learn more about them and their integrity and who they are and hear them speak. And I just really respect her. And it's kind of like when, you learn about your heroes and they usually don't
live up
to your standards. Yeah.
Yeah.
Except this morning, I just had this moment where I was like, oh, she's pretty great. And I know she really doesn't like compliments. So I feel bad kind of touting her, except that no, you go, girl. You're doing
Sometimes
great things.
Compliments need to be given.
Yeah, she's doing great things. She's writing great books. And I just really appreciate her, and I appreciate Sarah. And I really recommend to everybody to go check it out because it's a pretty comprehensive overview of things. It doesn't really go back into details about all the events that have happened. So you may want to read an article or two, but there's plenty of articles out there on all the events that transpired last month. But I highly recommend it. It's fascinating.
Well, I will definitely be giving it a listen later on this week when I have some time.
Yeah. So before we jump into the book that we've read this week, I have a question for you, Kelsey. So we're going a bit generic, but how's your reading been so far this year?
It's funny you ask that because I think I've read 2 books this year so far. It was a very slow month for me.
It's kind of crazy because now that we do this podcast...
I read 3. Sorry. I got 3 done.
But yeah, now that we do this podcast, there's a little bit more that goes into reading a book because there's the recording and there's the note-taking. And so reading each book maybe takes a little bit more time. There's also some critical thinking that goes into it.
Yes.
I'm up to 6, which is, I think,
good job.
Fair. It's totally fair.
Good.
I'm stressed because I have podcast reading and I have 2 romance book clubs that I'm in.
Oh, man.
And it's overwhelming. I know you have a romance book club that you're in.
Yes.
So it's finding time to read things just for fun is becoming the new challenge.
Yes. I will say though, for me, my reading has been lax, not because of the busyness, but simply because I've been doing other things.
Well, that's good too.
We've been doing some cleanup around the house, some getting rid of stuff. So that's kind of occupying my normal reading time.
And I guarantee you're going to have a month where you read a gazillion books.
Oh,
it's just
absolutely. I'm very excited. So the book club book for my book club this month I should say, is my pick. And I'm very much looking forward to it.
Tell me more. What is it?
So it is The Hidden Blade by Sheree Thomas.
Ooh.
which is a new author for me. I've never read any of her work, and it is basically like a mashup between Chinese culture and Victorian England culture.
Very cool.
Yeah, and there's like, if I remember it correctly, there's like some spy work involved. Ooh. And like needing to be true to oneself and like one's country, and I'm very intrigued by it.
Well, you're going to have to tell me all about it.
Yes.
So the book we are talking about today, though, is The Earl I Ruined by Scarlett Peckham.
Also a new author for me.
Yay!
So because it's a new author for me, and maybe it is for you too, we wanted to give you some information about Scarlett Peckham, who fell in love with romance novels as a child, sneaking paperbacks from the stash in her grandmother's closet. By the time she came of age, she had exhausted her library supply and begun to dream of writing one of her own. And so she studied English at Columbia University and built a career in communications, but she always returned to her early obsession in her free hours, which is those delicious big-hearted books you devour in the dark and can never bear to put down. Her Golden Heart-winning debut novel, The Duke I Tempted, was named a Best Romance Novel of 2018 by BookPage and The Washington Post and called Astonishingly Good by the New York Times Book Review, which is the first book to this series that we are reading today. So she recently moved to LA after spending most of her life in Brooklyn and London. And when she's not reading or writing romance, she enjoys drinking immoderate quantities of white wine, watching The Real Housewives, and dressing her cat in bow ties.
And so she also appears to be married to the bass player for the band Vampire Weekend, and they just won a Grammy.
I didn't know they won a Grammy. I didn't even know they had a new album out, but I listened to Vampire Weekend way back in the day. Like, their first two albums were like super, I listened to them backwards and forwards.
I really hope that I didn't get that wrong, but like I was following a chain of social posts of hers that came from her newsletter, and I'm subscribed to her newsletter, and I really recommend it to everybody. It's uproariously funny. It is so funny. She is great on the page in any form.
Excellent. And just so everyone knows, we did take these facts directly from her bio on her website. So if you want to learn more or you want to double check what we said, check her website.
And this week, we're also going to provide a history fact. So in this book, at a dinner, they mentioned that a recent bill had just replaced the practice of the marriage vow with a system of banns. And so today, we're going to talk about the Marriage Act of 1753. Now, this also is our first mention that this book is set in the 1750s. So guys, we have some wigs.
We do.
But before we get into the details of the Marriage Act, let's talk a little bit about what marriage was like in the 18th century. So in both England and Scotland, the only requirements for making a marriage legal was free consent of both partners, as long as they were of age, which was 14 for boys and 12 for girls. And they were free of unlawful degrees of kinship and were not engaged in any other marriage. So those were the only requirements. And parents were not required to consent or be present, and witnesses were not required either. So this meant that a marriage could be considered legal if both parties agreed at the time or agreed for the future, and then followed the verbal agreement with sex. And due to the lack of witnesses needed, many things could be done in private, such as through letters, where either partner referred to the name of the other as husband or wife. And cohabitation was also a sign of marriage. Neighbors being aware of the couple living under the same roof, or relations who could agree to the truth of such a situation, was also considered legally binding.
Well, that sounds a little confusing.
Yes.
As far as telling if you were married or not. But that is not to say that marriages more resembling our modern versions, churches, witnesses, ceremonies, were not also common during the time. But they were not any more legally binding than the promise of each partner to one another, and this held true in both England and Scotland.
So, the Marriage Act of 1753, whose full title is An Act for the Better Preventing of Clandestine Marriage, and was popularly known as Lord Hardwicke's Marriage Act, was the first statutory legislation in England and Wales to require a formal ceremony of marriage.
The act tightened the existing ecclesiastical rules regarding marriage, providing that for a marriage to be valid, it had to be performed in a church and after the publication of bans or the obtaining of a license. Those under the age of 21 had to have parental consent if they were married by license. Marriages by bans by contrast, were valid as long as the parent of the minor did not actually forbid the bans. Jews and Quakers were exempt from its provisions, although the act did not go so far as to declare such marriages valid, and it was many years before their legal standing was assured.
However, some couples evaded the act by traveling to Scotland. Various Scottish border villages became known as places to marry. And in the 1770s, the construction of a toll road passing through the hitherto obscure village of Gretny led to Gretna Green becoming synonymous with romantic elopements.
Which we have read lots about in other romance novels. So honestly, I was actually very happy with this new information about the Marriage Act of 1753 because it made me understand the whole going to Scotland thing a little bit better.
Yes. And then as Scarlett writes in our book today, she says, quote, "It was purported to protect women from men who would abuse them with false promises of marriage under the old codes. But in our main character's opinion, its primary effect was to put barriers between women and what modest control they had over their own lives."
I loved that line. I thought it was very profound.
Yeah.
And the Marriage Act was seen in many ways as not any more likely to provide justice for women. Indeed, the new laws were more gender and class biased, as well as being far more removed from the reality of the people at the time.
And if you'd like to learn more, we are going to link to the references that we used for this on our website. And I also highly recommend you do check out those references that I'm going to put because there's a really interesting original case that was kind of like the catalyst for Hardwick with like 2 wives and emotional abuse and hundreds of love letters. So it's like there's a cool old historical case there. But anyhow, lots to learn.
That personally sounds very fascinating, and I will have to do some research when we're done.
Definitely.
But today we have a few of our main tropes, which some we have seen before. One is the ruin of a reputation, although there is a little twist to that one. A fake engagement, unrequited love, marriage to save a reputation, and a sudden and deadly fever from bad weather.
One of my favorites. I have really come to love that one. It's like, oh no, it's raining.
Oh no, I am now on death's door, and my love will be realized as I come through this fever.
However, in this one, it's actually it's a little more believable. There's a long time in bad weather, but that's later in the book. So let's get on to the beginning. So our main characters today are Lady Constance Stonewell and Julian Heywood, the Earl of Apthorpe.
Also known as Lord Boar.
It's true. So shall we get started?
We shall. We begin our tale at a distasteful hour of the morning, certainly well before the hour that our heroine usually arises. However, she is awake, she is hungover, and she is vexed. Our heroine is Lady Constance Stonewell, and she is frustrated over her failure to find a match for her friend Miss Julianne Bastian, specifically because one of her prime options has recently put himself decidedly out of the running.
The man is none other than Lord Boar, who is a family relation by marriage of respective cousins, and she's peeved that he seems to have found, quote, new enterprising ways to drain her of her youth and beauty. But while upset that Lord Boar has become a complication, Constance feels assured by the fact that, quote, by now Gillian would have seen the poem and realized that Lord Apthorpe was not the saintly specimen of manhood that he so vigorously imitated. So we know that Constance has done something to make sure that her friend knows to steer clear of him.
However, she is interrupted from her morning ritual by a young child who theatrically bounds into her room, bewigged with a grown man's wig, he must have pilfered, and who introduces himself as Lord Arsthorpe. This new lisp of her cousin's son Georgie is certainly entertaining and brings a little joy back into her morning. She tells him that while she does agree that his version is better, it's not precise nor terribly polite.
So the two leave her boudoir to go in search of the wig's owner, who is Apthorpe himself, as he is family and currently lives in the same house.
But internally, Constance is still reeling from the startling information she had received about Lord Boar. For years of their acquaintance, Apthorpe had always acted the model of polite society and had looked down his nose at all her faults and flaws, quote, missing no opportunity to deem her continental and unladylike. He cast himself as the solemn future statesman, shouldering his heavy responsibilities with perfect bearing, in contrast to her, the frivolous, loud orphan, who preferred hosting parties to doing charitable works and collecting gossip rather than accomplishments. He made no secret that he viewed her as a naughty child who required constant supervision, lest she be caught dangling from a chandelier in her nightdress, or worse, inviting shame upon her family with her wanton, reckless ways.
And as family, they couldn't completely avoid each other, and their differences had always led to their healthy rivalry. However, they have no luck finding Apthorpe in his room, so she deposits her young cousin with his nanny when she hears a newsboy outside hawking his paper. "Lord Arsthorpe and the sinful—"
And Constance slams the window shut in a panic. First, Georgie saying Arsthorpe, but now a newsboy? Was it not an accidental lisp? Did Georgie actually hear that particular name from him? And where did the newspaper boy learn it from? Because Constance hadn't used his name, and she had only sent it to her usual discreet audience of ladies, written in a code. It had to be a coincidence, right?
So she steels herself to descend to breakfast, where she is sure that Apthorpe will still be. But Apthorpe's seat is empty, and her cousin Hilary and her husband Lord Rosecroft are sitting in silence, looking like someone has died.
Oof. After forcing some light, polite conversation, she asks the question she really wants to know. Where is young Lord Boar this morning? And is informed that a truly horrible, terribly slanderous story has in fact been published about him this morning. Quote, "I see. Is it about his debts?" "Please let it be about his debts," Constance pleaded silently.
For Apthorpe was increasingly desperate for funds, so this wasn't an altogether irrational hope. But her hopes are soon dashed when Hilary admits that, quote, "The details are not polite. Suffice it to say, one of those vulgar gutter verses is going around, and it dishonors him."
Ooh. And at this, Constance knows. She doesn't know how, but she knows with certainty that it started with her, that the information she had sent to her women's group had become public. And she tries to play it off, quote, "I'm sure it will pass quickly, whatever it is. After all, Apthorpe's reputation is as spotless as they come. He's the most boring man in England." His infamous dullness was precisely what had created her dilemma. Deigning a blandness one did not privately possess was misleading to the point of being treacherous when one was a gentleman presenting himself to a woman as a candidate for the lifelong office of her husband. Female happiness was routinely diminished by secrets male society insisted ladies were too delicate to countenance, until after their wedding, when it was too late to object. Constance considered it her duty to correct his imbalance using the arts at her disposal, namely gossip.
But gossip had gotten her into trouble before with her brother, the Duke of Westmead, and Constance refuses to lose him again. And she was at risk of this because the unfortunate circulation had come at an extremely unfortunate time, on the morning of the vote of Apthorpe's Canal Bill, which her brother had painstakingly backed. The success of this bill was not only personal, but it was Apthorpe's best chance to make back his fortune and improve the lives of his tenants. Constance knew this, as she knew in her bones that she had to make this right. So she sets about trying to do just that.
Meanwhile, Julian Heywood, Earl of Apthorpe, is drowning his sorrows. In some ways, it was lovely to be ruined because, one, spirits tasted better, and two, ruined people could drink spirits early in the afternoon. But truly, he is at a loss. His whole life has been ruined in just a few short stanzas. His good name tarnished, his reputation slandered, and his bill, the thing he worked for years to accomplish, his saving grace and his chance at redemption, was doomed to die on the floor. His mother and sister would be cast out of their home, his debts called in, and more than that, they would probably die of shame.
And of course, it completely took out the option of proposing to the woman that he had been in love with for 8 years, as, quote, "His prospects for matrimony were as dead as his political ambitions, for no parents who had read the previous evening's Saints and Satyrs would allow their daughter within 100 yards of him." And Julian actually doesn't think that he'd blame any fathers for keeping their daughters far away, and not because of his predilections, but rather for the fact that no woman should be shackled to a man who had allowed himself to be ruined twice.
Ooh. Yes, the first time had been naivety. Too much responsibility thrust upon a young man's shoulders too early, and one bad investment into a coal mine meant a lost fortune. But this ruination...
But then, Julian is interrupted from any more self-flagellation by a knock at the kitchen door, and he is shocked to find Lady Constance on the stoop. And after pushing her way inside and delicately insulting the state of his home, as he's moved back to the dilapidated Apthorpe Hall to try to shield his cousins from any ill effects, she insists that she must speak to him despite his protests for the need for her to leave.
Ever the honorable gentleman, Apthorpe knows he must tell her the rumors that have been spread about him, but before he can get far, Constance admits she knows about them already. She knows, she tells him, because she wrote the poem. And, quote, his frantic desire to get her out of his house by any means necessary was suddenly replaced by a very still kind of quiet, a quiet that began in his bones and rose up through his blood, the kind of quiet the body undertook when the mind needed all the energy one possessed to make sense of what one had just heard. A statement that could not, must not, be true. He had never begged for anything in his life. He was far too proud. But today, in this moment, he could only whisper a plea, "Tell me I misheard you."
But unfortunately, he has not. Constance tries her best to convince Apthorpe that she didn't mean any harm. She just didn't want Miss Bastian to end up with, doesn't know how it ended up in, but you see, all is not lost.
Apthorpe interjects, though, because he can't make sense of life in this moment. Why are you here, he asks.
To fix it, she replies. Quote, Lord Apthorpe, I am here to do what integrity demands when one's actions have, however inadvertently, ruined a reputation. I have come to offer my hand in marriage.
Apthorpe is shocked silent, and Constance, always affected by his perfect beauty in fluttery ways, tries to explain why it would work. But finally, Apthorpe shakes himself and demands she stop and requests she join him upstairs. Shall we discuss the terms of my offer? She starts. But no, Julian has other ideas. Give me your hand, if you please, he says. Constance tentatively obeys. Julian directs her to the front of the room and asks her to stand there, and then he places the newspaper in her hands. Read it, he tells her quietly, and takes a seat on the settee.
And Constance is aghast, but Julian continues, If you can write it, Lady Constance, then I dare say you can read it. Ooh. And so she does, with the proper amount of emphasis and a little sass too, which is her way. And now, since it's so integral to our story, we shall recite A Word of Warning About a Proper Lordling by Princess Cosima Ballade.
This week, Princess Cosima must strike a chord of caution about a certain lord. Marriage-minded ladies should beware that this man who haunts the drawing rooms of St. James Square, and indeed the halls of Parliament, where one notes with some lament, he is known to ramble on about the laws of decency, and the creek heads of the Midland shires with equal frequency, is in search of a wife possessed of a fortune, of which he might exchange his title for a portion. You will know him by his manner fair, and his courtly air, and by the beauty of his golden hair. Such a swain might seem a suitor most appealing, if one did not know the secrets he's concealing. A reputation for virtue, calm, and gravity belies an inclination for depravity. Princess Cosima must, out of duty, here announce his lordship belongs to a secret whipping house, where he's been espied by London's knowing sages, enjoying acts not fit for decent pages. A rogue in disguise as a paragon of virtue is the kind of rogue most liable to hurt you, or, better still, be the source of rue. On that day he comes to you, and beseeches, oh wicked farce, that his wife deliver pain unto his arse.
Oh my God, that poem makes me smile so hard. It's so silly. Okay. Well, at the end of the reading, Julian replies, Inspired work, though you might have tidied up the meter.
Oh, burn.
And Constance scrambles, trying to explain, but Julian says she should take her own advice and stay away from him. But she can't let this go, and she spits out the whole story about how she was simply trying to match him and Miss Bastian, only to discover that Julian didn't even like Miss Bastian. Somehow she had read all the signs between them wrong. Hadn't he just last week asked her about what a woman would like for a betrothal gift after dancing with Miss Bastian?
Julian, at this point, wonders if he's lost his wits as well as his reputation. Can Constance really be so daft? He had asked her about the gift because, well, he was so close. It had been a reckless moment, but he had allowed himself one moment to be ruled by his emotions. Quote, because he'd been in love with Constance so long, it felt as unremarkable as breathing. Because he'd dreamt of the day when he could finally tell her he adored her. Because he'd spent the past 8 years trying to shape himself into the kind of man who had more to offer her than a pair of bankrupt salt mines, a crumbling earldom, and more debts than he was comfortable tallying in his own mind. For years, he'd struggled not to make a fool of himself in front of her, not to let his longing seep out at every family supper and ballroom soiree and chance passing in the corridor of his cousin's townhouse. Evidently, he'd been better at it than he thought.
But in this cruel moment, the opportunity to marry the woman that he has loved feels like a curse and not a blessing, because he can't forgive her for this. Not only has she ruined his reputation and possibly destroyed the lives of countless others with her gossip, but she has thoroughly broken his heart. Scrambling for purchase somewhere and desperate to make it right, Constance seizes a chance and changes her plan on the fly. I think you might have misunderstood me, she said with a dry smile. I wasn't suggesting we actually marry. And with this, she has his attention, and she outlines her plan.
Constance is a social wizard and the sister of a powerful duke. Together, as an engaged couple, they'll take on society and methodically try to win back votes for his bill. She'll even ally her powerful conservative godmother, Lady Spence, to the cause by pretending that she has become pious and needs guidance as she is about to enter a marriage. And at the end, she'll go on a vacation to the continent and release him from his obligation to her. Julian, of course, thinks that this is ridiculous, as she would ruin her own reputation with this plan, to which Constance shoots back that Julian needn't bother with that line, as he'd never thought her much of a lady with a reputation to defend ever. Quote, his mouth fell open in offense. He looked genuinely aghast. I've never said you weren't a lady. She snorted. No, you are far too polite to ever say anything as direct as that, Lord Boar. Instead, you imply I cut my meat too indelicately, evade my chaperones too frequently, fraternize with gentlemen too indiscriminately, curtsy too abruptly, talk too loudly, and go on about plays and poetry too lengthily. One needn't explicitly call someone unsuitable to make the point.
So at this point, as the reader, we can understand that their relationship is pretty strained. They've done each other wrong for a while now.
Oh, yeah.
But then she also adds later, being improper is my calling. And after some debate, Julian starts to see the possibility in her plan. And the chance to right things is one that he has to take, no matter how much it might hurt his heart. There is just one important hurdle they would have to surmount. Constance's brother, Archer, the Duke of Westmead.
But Constance has one sure way to win him over. They must act perfectly, madly, convincingly in love. Quote, she nodded, madly, for ages and ages, ever since I caught you unawares and kissed you in the garden maze, and you could not stop dreaming about me. The words were like a stick pin to his heart, far closer to the truth than she could know. Could he stomach it, he wonders? But then when Constance actually begs him, he knows. Of course, quote, of course he could pretend. He could because adoring her came as naturally as drawing breath. He had loved her for 8 years. What was 4 weeks more? So he agrees and, quote, in that moment he mourned all the things he wanted that they never would have, places he'd imagined taking her, secrets he'd always wanted her to know, questions he'd always longed to ask her, 1,000 small moments they would never share.
There is, of course, one condition. He tells her that when this is over, we will never speak again because, quote, it matters, Constance. It matters what you did. It matters when you hurt people. And he continues for a bit, finally saying, quote, what you have done will expose a place that deliberately operates in darkness because it is a sanctuary to people whom the men and women ranting outside my door believe belong in hell for something that harms no one. People who are dear to me may be exposed in consequence, and people whose livelihoods depend on the discretion the place offers may suffer. And for what? So that the public may have the joy of righteous disapproval?
For Constance, a woman of means and privilege who had never had to worry about these sorts of consequences before, fully understanding this is hard. But she tries, and she agrees to his stipulation, and so our farce begins.
The first thing Constance does is write a second poem as Cosima, saying her first bout of information was an error, but that she has learned that the lord in question is in fact betrothed to a silver-haired sister of a duke. And while this perhaps has the desired effect on the ton, which is to add some uncertainty to the rumors, it has a decidedly adverse effect on her brother, because he is most displeased to have found out about this betrothal from a newspaper. And he is even more shocked when Constance and Julian begin their performances, because for all he's ever seen, the pair have hated each other. But Constance cries that she is rapturously in love, and her brother demands to know what scheme they've concocted. Hasn't she addressed every Christmas gift to Lord Boar? And really, truly, is she in love with, quote, a person who does nothing but lecture you on how bothersome and vulgar you are?
Apthorpe froze. He felt Constance freeze beside him. Was that true? Given that she had made exactly the same observation the day before, he could only surmise that he was guilty. He meant to help her see that her bold ways left her open to criticism. He had never meant to imply she was unfit.
But Constance recovers quickly and replies wittily, but her brother won't give up easily. He says, quote, I beg you, before you make a mistake that is irrevocable, consider whether there might be some person out there whom you cherish and who would cherish you in return. And so, to his honest plea, the only thing that Apthorpe can do to make this ruse work is to tell the truth. So he says, Your Grace, I have loved your sister since I was 18 years old. I regret I hid my feelings behind a stiff exterior, but it was only because I did not want to prevail on her to consider my suit until I felt confident I could be the kind of husband who deserves her. It is the tragedy of my life that I will never be that man, and the miracle of it that your sister would have me anyway.
Oh my God, it's so perfect. It's such a good line.
It really is.
Her brother is almost convinced. So they barter the evening to convince him of their devotion, and if by the end he isn't, then he'll drop his suit. And so the evening continues, with each of our main characters a bit off-kilter. The honest confessions during their charade have left them both reeling, but they can't stop now that they've started, and so they arrange to meet and to be discovered in the wig closet to prove their ardor.
But first, they have to survive dinner. Poppy, Constance's sister-in-law, and her cousin Hilary both gush about how they just knew that Julian and Constance actually harbored secret feelings for one another, and then Constance is prompted to tell the story of how they first fell in love. And she settles on a mostly true story, as she knows that all lies are strongest when built on truths. And the story goes that she was just 14 and had cornered Julian in the maze, latching herself on him for a kiss. Although mortified at his rejection, the sweet bouquet he later delivered with an attached note had only made her fall harder. The note said that she was simply too young, but one day she would have many admirers and that the best things were worth waiting for.
Julian, hearing this, is properly chastised. The kiss and the rejection had happened. The bouquet and the note had not. He really had been a cad. But it had been a low time in his life, when he had just inherited a mountain of debt and responsibility, and he had been young too, and had been inappropriately fascinated with the too young Constance. So he had vehemently rejected her, and thought nothing of it as he moved forward with his life.
And after a few minutes, Constance excuses herself from the table. Apthorpe follows as planned, and they meet in the closet. Constance hurriedly and clumsily tries to kiss him, for they must be discovered in a passionate embrace. And while at first Julian's rejection of the kiss brings Constance shame and bad memories, what eventually transpires is a lovely scene of consent and discovery. Because finally, after some dialogue, Julian does consent to kiss her, and they have a real moment, complete with humor and ardor, as Constance begins to learn the finer points of patience, anticipation, and desire.
Apthorpe is a learned tutor, and starts with only the touch of a hand, and eventually, quote, just like that, she was kissing him exactly like a lover, and was not pretending that she liked it. Julian is shooketh by the moment they just shared. He had once observed Constance in another man's arms, and he had not assumed her to be so innocent and unknowing. He certainly did not hold that against her, as he was no hypocrite. But he is so rattled that he has been so wrong about so many things about her.
And he had wanted her so badly for so long that this discovery has broken down his barriers. Quote, He gave her the kind of filthy, erotic kiss that began in the hips and ended somewhere in the brain. A kiss that was not so much a kiss as a way of making love with all one's clothes on. The kind of kiss he had told her new lovers did not exchange before they knew each other's bodies. Well, he'd been lying. He had wanted her for too many years to pretend that he did not want to fuck her filthily in such a way that she would never want another.
Ooh, and so you can see that things are getting pretty damn passionate when the closet door opens. And thus, Constance's brother is convinced. Well, he does punch Julian, but eventually he assents to their plan to marry. And so they're on to the next part of their plan to rescue Apthorpe's Bill, a public night at the opera in the Duke's box.
Around this time, we also learn that Constance believes that there was a political motivation for her poem to have found its way into the circulation, and she plans to follow up on the path her poem took. She believes that it's not just malicious intent, but political wheeling and possibly even something far more salacious. She also suspects that the rumors hadn't found their way to her by accident.
When Julian arrives the evening of the opera, he finds Constance pacing in the orangery as she says that the flush from the heat and exertion helps her pallid complexion. Julian is wrestling with his emotions because the kiss had awakened something within Constance, and that, in turn, awakened something in him. He knows that it is, quote, unbecoming to slaver over women who hadn't asked to be objects of his fantasies. And as a rule, he kept all his amorous connections to his partners at Charlotte Street. But when he sees her smiling at him in a way that makes him know she's remembering their lascivious kiss, he almost can't contain himself. Quote, he wanted to see that look again. He wanted to make her shaky with a single word whispered in her ear, or a bold command on a scrap of paper pressed in her hand. He wanted to sit beside her at the opera and make her come without removing a single stitch of clothing. He wanted her to see him as he truly was, which was a gentleman, yes, but one with a preternatural talent for fucking.
But gently bred virgins weren't for men with scruples, and he wasn't ready to abandon his. So this month is going to be difficult for him. And Constance certainly does not make it easy for him either. She winks, remarks on how lovely he looks sans wig, which she smartly had recommended he go without. And
good job.
Yes, and carries on flirting as the evening progresses. However, as they are supposed to act in love, this isn't really cruel, it's just confusing. But she does have a piece of information for Julian. She has learned the woman who whispered the information about Charlotte Street to her at the ball must be an actress at the Theatre Royal. She has tracked down this information through the dress that the lady was wearing. She wants to continue chasing down this lead, but Julian insists that she leave it. After all, it was Constance who ruined his reputation. Why do they need to dig deeper? He wants her to drop this line completely. And so they bat back and forth with cutting insults, Julian preferring to harp on her gossipy ways and how she's dug them into this mess, and Constance constantly bringing up his sexual proclivities and making lewd assumptions. Finally, though, it's time to leave for the opera, and they call a truce. But Julian gets the last word. I don't have an affliction, he said in a low voice. I am perfectly capable of regulating my desires. But Constance, don't call them unnatural until you try them.
The night at the opera does not go how Constance expects. For the first time since she first came to England from France as a wild young orphan, she is ostracized by society. The ton is whispering about her, and she almost crumples. But in this moment, Apthorpe guides her. Constance realizes that he has had to walk through life like this, constantly talked about, constantly on the edge of complete ruin. Suddenly, she has compassion and respect for him, and the measured facade he has constructed for himself over the years. Two other very important things happen at the opera as well. Firstly, Miss Julianne Bastian, pretty but socially nothing American heiress Julianne Bastian, who Constance had befriended because she had wanted to, gives Constance the cut direct. And she is engaged to the odious Lord Harlan Stoke. And with this interaction, she is undone. And Julian has a revelation. Quote, Christ, was it possible that the indomitable hellion, Constance Stonewall, moments before at her most confident and insouciant, was on the verge of weeping? He stared at her, struck dumb. It's an act. It's always been an act. She was not entirely the haunty, saucy woman she presented herself to be. She just worked very, very hard to pretend that she was. For some reason, that broke his heart.
And so once again, Julian comes to the rescue, directing her to pretend to say something cutting, and he pantomiming the reply. They escape to recover in the box for their second important interaction of the night. It is there that they begin their, quote, courtship of her godmother, Lady Spence. And while she does not approve of their match, and while she is mildly suspicious of the pair, she still invites them to their house tomorrow as, quote, perhaps it's not too late to make a proper lady of you yet.
The next day at Lady Spence's, they are greeted with a small group which includes Henry Evesham, the editor of Saints and Satyrs, who Constance already knows. Evesham was a curate turned journalist with evangelical leanings and enjoying increasing renown for his crusading gazette calling out the city's vices. In other words, a complication. But the day is a success, and the two part happy at the end, feeling that progress has been made. Unfortunately, Evesham follows Julian for a private word. He is on a quest to rid the city of vice, and as a peer of the realm, does Apthorpe not see it also as part of his duty? Evesham is particularly interested in one establishment, and he doesn't even veil his threat. If Apthorpe helps him expose Charlotte Street and those who frequent it, he will keep his name out of it. And if he doesn't, he will not. End quote. Apthorpe would almost like him for this attempt at canter, were Evesham not suggesting that he helped betray the secrets of consenting people who had asked the world for nothing more than the tolerance to do what they liked harmlessly and in private.
Of course, he declines the offer. Quote, I have no interest in perpetuating the slander against me by appearing to take an interest in it. Yeah.
Good one.
But this interaction causes Julian to double back and find Constance and talk to her before Evesham can. He tells her that he is concerned that Evesham will become a problem, and they discuss the events of the luncheon and his walk. He has decided that he does want to know more information about the actress and the dress so that he can pursue the political theories safely on his own.
So Constance starts at the beginning of the tale, which goes back to her misled matchmaking and recounts the details. The important ones being that this woman, who had whispered the gossip to Constance at a ball, had mentioned Wednesday night specifically, but Apthorpe is livid when he realizes how little this woman gave Constance. Am I to understand, he said, that you destroyed my reputation over a rumor from a total stranger? She winced. No, in fact, I intended to ignore the rumor entirely because it was so laughable. I mean, imagine, Apthorpe, you frisking about at a bawdy house. He turned around, stepped forward, and looked directly in her eyes. Yes, Constance. Imagine.
Wow. So once Constance cools off enough, she continues that she confirmed the details by stealing into his room and reading his diary. There were entries that confirmed his activities enough for Constance. And Julian is understandably upset at his privacy being disrespected, but Constance has had enough. She tells him, I'm tired of being vilified for doing what I thought was right. I invite you to live as a woman and enjoy the choices we are blessed with, and then judge me for sharing information about what men do in private. I have kept such secrets before out of discretion and lived to very much wish that I had not. I didn't mean to harm you. I only meant to protect Jillian. Whew.
Though they are at odds, she continues to recount what she's learned. The woman who fed her the gossip was wearing a distinct blue dress, which she learned from her mantua maker was sold only one time, to the Theatre Royal. So the woman was most likely an actress, and she's instructed her mantua maker to inquire about who wore the dress. Julian again asks her to quit pursuing this, and she assents reluctantly. And they also determine at this time that though Constance knew Henry Evesham, she did not give him the poem.
But tensions are high, words are slung, and suddenly they are transported back in time in their argument to a past situation at a house party in Devon, and Constance can take no more and storms out. Because that story hurt to recount. She had just returned to England after finishing school in France and, quote, having polished herself into a gem with enough facets to sparkle in any kind of lighting, she completed her studies by learning how to flirt. And she had learned that if you want to flirt with someone, you didn't announce it. So she went about not flirting with the man of her affections in the only way that Constance did everything, by overdoing it. She She flirted shamelessly with another partygoer until things got too heated and they had a humiliating kiss in the portrait gallery, before which the object of her fancy, who, yes, was Apthorpe, of course, had come in and witnessed her with the other man, and he had offered to extricate her, and she had boldly said that she was fine.
But oh, if she had only taken his offer. Because moments after his departure, her flirtee, Lord Harlan Stoke, said some truly nasty things to her that scarred her deeply. Quote, "For a girl who acts like a tart, you kiss like a bloody goat." And later, after the pawing in the gallery, the harsh words, and a general revelation about his terrible character, she had heard the rumors about another girl who had been at a party. A very young girl who had gotten in trouble and now would never have a season. She hated that she had not sounded a warning. She promised herself that the next time she had an inkling a man did not play by the assigned rules, she would act. She would use her innate gift for observation to fashion herself a position in the world that gave her information others lacked, and she would use it as a scythe. Not because she was cruel, not because she was reckless in matters such as this, just the opposite, because she had learned her lesson. Women must protect one another. And in the same spirit, a man was being foolish and short-sighted. Well, by God, she could protect him too.
And so in her anger and memory, she dashes off a letter to Miss Bastian. But later that evening, though she is ready for bed, Apthorpe returns to chat with her. He hated the way that they had left things earlier, and he has a few apologies to make, and not just for the current things, but also for the past. And this opens the door for the two of them to realize a few things about each other. Constance admits that she didn't taunt and dismiss him because she hated him. She did that because she had wanted him to notice her. He had completely misread the signs. He had been so deep in stress from his financial situation and responsibilities that he was barely thinking straight. But he admits that he had been extremely interested at the time. He had just thought his interest wouldn't be returned, so he hadn't extended it. But they are both mollified from their earlier fight now that the truths and apologies have been extended, so they part content for the moment.
Later the next day, Apthorpe returns home to a disturbing difference. The moldy, musty smell of his crumbling mansion has been replaced with lemon and wood polish. Constance is there with a fleet of servants cleaning and decorating. She believes that he didn't spruce things up because he can't afford to make the repairs and hire the servants. But of course, that's only part of the reason. So Apthorpe drags Constance into his study to continue the argument, and Constance, while trying to make a point, starts rifling through one of his trunks. She continues that keeping up appearances is not charity but strategy, and Apthorpe can't fully get his points across because what Constance pulls from the box is definitely not riding gear. And what is this pistol? And this cord of rope? This blindfold? This pair of leather cuffs with silver hooks? And of course, the piece de la resistance, a marble dildo. But I'm confused, Constance starts. You told me I was wrong about your desires, but if you have all this, you must... He rubbed his temples. None of this was in any way proper to discuss, but if the choice was between being thought a sanctimonious liar, he'd rather have out with the truth. He wasn't ashamed of what he did with these objects, and he was tired of the implication that he should be. I didn't lie to you, if that's what you're suggesting. These things are not for use on me, though I would not be embarrassed if they were. I use them to pleasure lovers who happen to enjoy such things. He shot her a mordant glance to be sure she did not miss his meaning. In private.
But Constance can't grapple with this whole thing, and Apthorpe can't resist. Care for a demonstration, he asks. Why, yes, she said. She tossed her head back like a helpless maiden and brandished two limp wrists. Ravish me, Lord Apthorpe. I am most curious. Her mockery irritated him. Don't ask for what you don't want, he said in a low voice. She fluttered her lashes at him. I think you want me to believe that you are more intriguing than you really are, Lord Boar. And with that, the mood changes. Quote, without a second thought, he snapped up her wrists in his hands and whirled her around so that she faced the wall. She breathed in, startled. Do not call me Lord Boar, he whispered in her ear. Why not? She whispered back. He felt her breath quicken at the light pressure of his fingers on her wrists. He smoothed her pulse points with his thumb. Because it hurts my feelings.
With the addition of a tie around her wrists and some more commands, the tension builds. Constance is still being sassy, but Apthorpe too soon decides to untie her before things go too far. But it doesn't stop him from narrating what he would do to her if he had all the time in the world. And finally, the scene concludes with, quote, "No, I wouldn't let you watch." Why not? Because without being able to see me, you would never quite know what to expect. And I think, Constance, that you might like that very much. She let out a sigh so shaky that he felt it in his palms. He smiled. He'd thought so. He'd always thought so. He knew her type. He adored her type.
However, the delicious tension is interrupted by a knock on the door, and they are rudely brought back to reality because it's much too late to stop Constance as usual, and Julian's mother and sister have arrived. The mother and sister that he had previously told her under no circumstances to invite. Constance, in her usual way, has gotten things all wrong. Julian once again goes from aroused to furious in the blink of an eye. But there is nothing to stop this train, and out in the hallway they run into a beautiful little girl who Apthorpe scoops up familiarly and who looks just like Apthorpe.
And while Constance isn't judgmental, she immediately understands that she had read the situation incorrectly again, and is at least properly mortified. But ever resilient, she doesn't show it, and within moments his family is in love with her. The next day, his family is treated as princesses by Constance, and Julian is heart-wrenchingly depressed. His mother and sister have laughed more in one day than they had in 5 years, and he knew that at the end of this, losing Constance was going to hurt them just as much as it would hurt him, and that would only make him hurt all the more. It was terribly macabre.
But their invitation had served to help their strategy. Her godmother, Lady Spence, friends with Apthorpe's mother, had been so delighted that Apthorpe had brought his mother to town that she agreed to bring her husband to a dinner with Lord Apthorpe. They were one step closer to winning a very important vote. And at the end of that beautiful, terrible day, Julian has had enough and tells Constance that she must leave his family out of it because it will only hurt them more if he is ruined and they lose her and they have to go back to their lives of faded glory. Can she understand how that might feel, he wonders?
Oh, but of course she can. She has lived a life without parents, tossed from relative to relative, back and forth from France to England. And while she may have a tough exterior, underneath his anger, Julian knows that she smarts from those experiences. But Constance continues, quote, "You have always believed that I am an overindulged, frivolous creature who can never fathom pain or sadness. You persist in believing this even as I give up everything I care about to save your reputation. Malign me all you want, but don't forget our success has not come about by accident, Julian. I spend my nights plotting social engagements and writing letters to Hack eliciting support for your bill. I have planned your political dinners, your engagement ball, your bloody wedding. I'm exhausted because I can't sleep for dreaming about you and..." He put 2 hands on her shoulders. "Constance, do not touch me," she rasped. She wrenched around his body and stepped out into the storm. "Wait," Julian called raggedly, following her on the street. But she had enough of repeating the same story over and over, expecting a different ending. Their story would end like this, without a backward glance.
Except, of course, it doesn't. And it doesn't even end here that night, because Julian knows he's done her wrong, and he can't let her sleep like that. Constance hears a knock at her window, and Julian has climbed the trellis to apologize. And, well, not just apologize. He actually doesn't want to end it. He tells Constance that he wants to marry her, although, quote, "he said this with all the enthusiasm with which he might announce he wished to be buried at sea when he died young of the plague."
But truly, he doesn't want her to give up everything. He doesn't want her to be alone. And Constance realizes that she's accidentally built a trap, and she had to set him free from that. So she lashes back with a sharp retort about how they aren't in love, she doesn't love him, and he doesn't love her, and she won't marry without it. Ha! "But Constance," he said quietly, "what if I did? What if I told you that I've loved you all along? For years."
And while it felt so good to finally admit what he'd been hiding for years, his elation is very quickly replaced with sadness when Constance replies. How dare he say such a thing, she wonders. She does not believe him. He insists, she rebuffs, and so it goes on until, quote, It could not possibly be true, because love is not a declaration. It is a system of behavior. If the treatment I have enjoyed from you over the last 5 years amounts to your way of showing love, I'd do anything to avoid such adoration for the rest of my life.
Ooh. And so Julianne drops it. She tells him not to fret. She was just provoking him earlier to win the argument, but she has rented a villa in Spain and will be just fine once this is over. So Constance proposes a truce. For the rest of their time together, they will pretend to be in love, in public, in private. She won't meddle, and he won't lecture. And when it's over, they'll part. And Julian replies, "Yes, Constance, for 9 days, we will simply be in love." And what he meant, he knew, was that they never would be.
But this isn't the end of the evening, because Constance insists that he prove it and pulls him onto her bed. She's been so frustrated from wanting him, but he refuses to touch her, though he can help her if she would like to ease the distress. And so we have encounter number 1, which is a very steamy guided masturbation scene involving an apple and a blindfold and education and the expression of mutual desires. And at the end, quote, "When she came back to herself, she decided he was wrong. This feeling was not a death. It was more like waking up."
Ooh. And Constance just can't let herself have all the fun. She begs Apthorpe to give her a demonstration, or to let her touch him. And the torture to want something so badly is too much. And he does say no.
As the week progressed, Constance found that pretending to be in love was exhausting and excruciating. It was like she was seeing Julian for the first time, and her heart was breaking daily. It was a struggle to put on the usual act she did, as all her energy was zapped from keeping herself from falling to pieces. But she didn't have the luxury to retreat because they were so close.
They dine with Lord and Lady Spence, and they win him over. He barters a vote for a vote. He will vote for the canal if they support his proposal of Henry Evesham to Lord Lieutenant, and while that is a steep price, for now, it's one worth paying. After their success, Constance doesn't linger and leaves Julian with obvious sorrow. He once again can't leave it be and heads to her house because he must speak with her. This time, though, he waits for her downstairs because he has a gift for her, the kind of gift that won't keep. It's a puppy,
Ooh.
whom she promptly named Shrimpy, and is overjoyed with him. Julian is concerned, though, that she was upset and lets her know that she can always come to him if there is a problem. She insists she's fine, and they begin to part, but not before he can give her one more gift. This time, it's one he recommends that she open in private.
Before she has the chance to open it, though, her brother visits to confirm that she does want to marry Julian. To try to prove it to him, she tells him that she is in love with Julian, and then realizes to her horror that it's true. So then, before the night is over, she unwraps the gift to find a dildo like the one she had seen in his trunk, and a note which read, "For your pleasure, on nights when you want someone to touch you. I'm sorry I wasn't the man to do it. I'll never stop wishing that I could be. All my love, Julian."
Finally, the time for the vote on his bill has come, and it passes easily. But Julian can't muster up much excitement because he is consumed with thinking of Constance. And in his distraction in the moments before the vote, Henry Evesham had approached him and dropped a bomb. Henry had found out about Master Damien. Henry had found out that Julian hadn't been a member at the club. He'd been an employee. And he makes threats, or perhaps just states the truth. He says that Constance will find out. As Constance is preparing for her engagement ball, she receives an unexpected visitor. It's Julianne Bastian, who has decided that they should put aside their differences. But she is callous and cold, and Constance is hurt. She had considered Julian a friend, and she isn't really interested in a truce at this point. And Julian still intends to marry Lord Stoke, even after the letter that Constance had sent her. She had confronted him about it, and he had told her how Constance had pursued him like a harlot, and that wasn't hard to believe. Honestly, Constance was lucky he was so discreet about it. Ugh.
Right? And as Jillian won't even listen to the fact that Constance knows he has at least one child out of wedlock, she bids Jillian adieu. Jillian leaves on a calm yet ominous, quote, "You will regret this, bitch." And later, Julian arrives and begs a moment alone with Constance because they've succeeded. His bill has passed, and they celebrate with a kiss that leads to encounter number 2, where again, Constance gets all the fun when he goes down on her.
Mm-hmm.
His talk with Evesham earlier, though, has left him sure that while he doesn't want to let her go, he knows he can't subject her to a life with him.
Oh no, trouble is brewing. And the next evening, things basically pick up right where we left off. The engagement ball is about to start, and Julian goes to wait with Constance behind a curtain for their own grand entrance. And of course, as they wait for the acrobats to finish their performance, their tension, the end of their time together, and the time until the curtain comes up just makes things too irresistible. And quickly, the two are at it again for encounter number 3, where finally, this time, Constance gets to repay the favor. And when she's done that, Julian again can't resist and takes a trip under her skirts, even though the time is so short.
But it's not the time that undoes them. In the end, it's a simple trip that catches the curtain, just as Constance is coming. But perhaps all is not lost, as Julian, quote, stared out at the sea of aghast faces, and he was glad. Because some things were so shocking that you could never, ever recover from them. Some things were simply irreparable. It was selfish and inexcusable and wrong, but he didn't want to let her go. And now, he wouldn't have to.
And Constance, ever the performer, just leans over and plants a big kiss on his cheek, and the crowd roars. And the night is a smashing success, and while they dance, Julian says, "Marry me."
Constance again tries to cry no need, but he insists. She says, "I don't want to force you to do something you don't want to." "Good," he replies, "because I've been in love with you for 8 years, and there's nothing I want more."
And finally, they say the last few truths that the other needs to hear. They believe one another, and they actually agree to marry.
There is, of course, one more difficult hurdle for them to pass. Julian needs to tell Constance about his former employment. So before their wedding, he again comes to her room, and he starts to tell her that he has a secret. And as he starts to tell her that he has a secret, Constance breaks in and assumes wrongly again. She had assumed that the young child who had come with his mother and sister was his bastard, and he informs her, no, that is not the case. Anna's his niece, and her father, Lord Harlan Stoke.
Bastard.
And that is why Lord Stoke made the cut direct, on top of all the things with Jillian.
Ugh.
So with that truth out in the open, Constance confesses one of her own. She had pursued the dressmaker theater line of questioning, and she had learned that the lady who had gossiped to her often entertains Harlan Stoke. So they surmised that between Constance and Jillian and Harlan, somehow that conspiracy had started.
We are truly catching all our characters up to speed here, but we still have the bigger conversation yet to get to. And Julian does not shrink away. He tells Constance about his role at the club on Charlotte Street. Quote, "My role was to play a domineering sort of man in bed for members who paid for the privilege of indulging such a fantasy. I listened to what they wanted and made whatever it was come true." And he had done this for money to keep his family afloat and because it was something he enjoyed. Constance mulls all this over carefully and eventually finds the perfect response. "Julian, have I not adequately proven I have never met a scandal I wasn't able to use to my advantage? Have you somehow failed to notice that it's my greatest talent? If you plan to become infamous, my darling, then you've found the perfect woman." Julian was so relieved that he laughed. She reached out and rubbed his hair. "Julian, if Henry Evesham learns your secret, I shall simply tell him mine, that I am very blessed to spend my nights beside the finest male courtesan in London."
But of course, Constance can't leave it there. Yes, they'll be married in 2 days, but that means that there's only 2 days left for her chance to be a tart. For if he had done it, shouldn't she get to try it too? And this time he assents, and we have encounter number 4, where we have probably our most tender coupling, as Constance loses her virginity amidst such lovely sentiments as, quote, "Actually, the nice thing about making love is that, if you do it properly, you get to be exactly, exquisitely who you are."
And in the morning, Constance awakens to a note. "I can't wait to be your husband, Constance, but I'll be your courtesan whenever you like."
So let's bask in this feeling for a moment, shall we? Because things are about to get difficult again.
You thought things were over? The answer is no.
No. Later that day, Julianne arrives at Constance's house in a rage because Julianne Bastian has visited his home and his sister and has accused her of blackmail and is threatening to send his niece to the colonies. Everything has been misunderstood, and Constance hadn't even known that his niece was Lord Stokes at the time she saw Julianne. So there is a lot of miscommunication here.
Mm-hmm.
But now the mess was made, and Constance has a realization that Julianne won't ever really trust her. And though they do make up and they finally understand the actual facts, the damage is done, and Constance knows what she must do.
Julian is shaken from his day. First, his behavior with Constance, and then his visit to Lord Stoke. Though Lord Stoke had been upset with his intended and agreed to never lay a claim to Anne, he is drained. But tomorrow is the wedding, so he simply looks forward to then. The wedding arrives, the guests arrive, the bride never arrives.
It's an hour after it's due to start when it's confirmed. Constance has flown the coop, but she's done it in her typical grand fashion. She has published an article in Saints and Satyrs called "The Earl I Ruined, a Not-Quite Countess Confesses." And in it, she details her young love, her pining, and her reaction to Julian's rejection, that it had spurred her to set about to ruin him. She admits to all sorts of points of the story that weren't actually her fault, but make Julianne look clean of any possible rumors. She signs off saying, quote, "I hereby confess that it was all my fault, as most things usually are. I confess to being reckless with his future and his family and his heart. And most of all, I confess to discovering I care about him far too much to consign him a life with a woman he cannot forgive."
Julian is shaken. He knows why she did this and why she felt she had to. Quote, because she believed he could not forgive her, because he'd proved it. And even then, she'd still sacrificed her own happiness in order to protect him, because she loved him. She'd never declared it. She'd simply proved it. So there isn't an option for him, really. He rushes out into the rain to find her. He does make one stop, though, at Henry Evesham's to declare, "Agreed to drop this matter with Charlotte Street, and I'll give you the story of your bloody life."
And so after that, he rides for many, many hours in the rain to the port at Dover to find Constance. He wanders the ship he knows must be hers in a haze, and when he finally finds her, his legs give out.
Constance is aghast at his condition and the fact that he is here and has to disembark immediately with him to find a doctor. They end up at an inn, and while Constance has never nursed a sick person in her life, she attacks the task with her usual determination. And Julian is very sick. He manages to beg her to stay in his delirium, and she tells him, of course. And she tells him so much more as she nurses him, about the money in the bank, about the success of the canals, about his mother and sister and how happy they were. They're happy and adorable children, lovely little vignettes of the life she hopes to share with him. Quote, "This will be our life," the whisper said. "This will be our future. Just come back to me. Just open your eyes. Stay."
And Julian does awaken from the fever eventually, and they say the things that must be said. Constance thinks she will likely make his life miserable at points, but she has saved him once and he probably owes her a boon. Julian knows she was right to leave, as it had made him realize the error of his ways and the fact that nothing matters more than her. And so she says, "Then, Lord Apthorpe, I must do the only proper thing one can do when one has ruined a man, saved his reputation, destroyed his reputation once again, attempted to flee the country in a blinding rainstorm, causing him to pursue her at the risk of death by fever, and then nursed him back to health. And what is that?" He smiled. "I must offer you my hand in marriage. I accept."
As Julian continues to recover, her brother Westmead finds her and also shows her the article that Julian had published in response to her own. In it, Julian confesses his love for Constance. He confesses to his profession. He confesses that he enjoyed it and won't make any apology for it. He continues with, quote, "I hereby confess that it was all my fault. I confess to being reckless with my body and my family and my reputation. And most of all, I confess to being hopelessly in love with Lady Constance Stonewell. So in love that I want a chance to be forgiven, even if I don't deserve it. Signed, the Earl of Apthorpe. P.S. You can call me Arsthorpe all you like. I vastly prefer it to Lord Boar."
And once Julian is recovered, the two are married without much ceremony. It's pretty perfect for them, though. During his recovery, they've had time to talk, and they've talked about everything. By the end of it, the two seem truly healed and trusting. Quote, "They'd debated what they'd call their future children, and she'd told him that she'd never felt truly right or good or wanted. And he'd told her how he'd never felt worthy of his title or capable of much, and they'd held each other, both shocked that the other could be so wrong about themselves.
And of course, after the wedding, it's time for encounter number 5. And for this, Constance has an idea. Quote, "Given that we have already made wild, passionate love, I wondered if you would prefer to indulge in your perversities." Julian is upset at this request because, quote, "I think I once requested that you not call what I like perverse. Until I tried it," she cut in. "Yes, well, you see, that's just what's causing me distress." So she finally gets to play with the Master Damien side of Julian. They plot out a scene and play their parts to the letter, and as Julian suspected, Constance loves it all. And at the end, though, she is overwhelmed. She hated crying and had done so much of it this past month that she was sick of it. But it felt so good to do it right now. Because her fantasy had been that he would punish her for being naughty, and instead he had made her feel treasured and adored and able to be exactly who and what she was. "Come back, sweet Constance. I'm sorry, it was too intense." "No," she gasped. "That's not why I'm crying. I'm crying because I loved it. It felt like being free."
And then we get the epilogue where it's been a year and the play she's written is opening at the theater. It's called Lord Harlot, and I think you all can guess what it's about. But we're going to leave you on a much more wistful note with this passage. Lady Constance Stonewell had always intended to fall wildly, extravagantly in love. Eventually. And now that she had, she realized that it did not feel at all like she'd once imagined. It did not feel like being swept off one's feet by a man who had appeared suddenly in one's life as though he'd fallen from the sky, designed by God himself to adore your every breath and thought. It felt more like being, finally, at home. Except that home was not a place, but a person.
Ugh, what a great sentiment to end on.
I know, and I can't wait to talk about it. But first, shall we adjourn to the parlor?
We shall.
So today, we'd like to tell you all about an exciting new development for Blush magazine. Blush has changed hands and is now run by Jennifer and Alyssa of Lit Uncorked. And there's another exciting change, which is that now Blush magazine isn't a subscription, but is totally free.
And as a reminder, Blush is a digital magazine that takes readers beyond the page of their favorite books to meet their favorite authors. It's focused solely on the romance novel industry, interviewing authors, following trends, delving into tropes, and many more intricacies specific to the romance genre, and provides insightful, thought-provoking, and fun editorial content on a monthly basis.
So head on over to blush-magazine.com or bit.ly/blushmagazine to check out the latest issue, and we'll be sure to link to that in the show notes.
Also, this month, we're running a little promotional incentive for reviews. Reviews really help other listeners find us and help our show grow. So if you would like to take the time to leave us a review, either on Facebook or on Apple Podcasts, send us your address via email, and we'll send you a bookmark. And yes, we can ship internationally. So if you've left one in the past or would like a bookmark, drop us a line and we'll send one your way.
And today we have a book recommendation from an anonymous friend on Twitter, and they recommend The Bewildered Bride by Vanessa Riley. And this book features a diverse couple, as the heroine is Black, and also the author Vanessa Riley is Own Voices. So this one seems to have an elopement to Gretna Green, as we were talking about earlier. So there's a lot of excitement and fun there, it seems like, and it sounds really cool. And I look forward to reading some of Vanessa's books. She writes a lot of diverse romances set in this time period, and so I am hoping to get a chance myself to read some of her work.
And if you have a diverse book recommendation, we would love to hear from you. If you have an inclusive author you love, we want to hear about it and share it. Let us know through our email, romancepod@gmail.com.
And if you'd like to find us on social media, you can find us at Instagram and Twitter at TNStrumpets. That's T as in Tom, N as in Nancy. Facebook /TNStrumpets, Pinterest /TNStrumpets, and YouTube by searching our name.
And if you really want to be in the know, sign up for our email notifications on our website. Our website just got a revamp too, so you should definitely check it out. even if you've done so before, because it's fancier now.
It sure is. I'm so excited about it. It makes me really happy. It was fun. And our website is romancepod.com, and there you can find episodes, more information about us, and other resources. So take a look.
I'm going to start off with this book could be entitled Kelsey's Vocabulary Lesson, because throughout the entire book, I highlighted at least 10 words that, while I could gain context of, they were so new to me that I actually had to look up the definition, because I was like, I think it means this, but I've literally never seen this word. And so I need to actually get the dictionary definition of it.
Okay, this is brilliant. I love this. I was really excited for you to read this book because I really loved it, and I remembered this book, and I really wanted to read it again. There was just, it was very very loud in my mind. And so I just I was so excited to do a reread, and I was also excited for you to experience it. And when you told me that fact, that I was like, because we try not to talk too much if we haven't read the book about it before this discussion. So you were like, yeah, I didn't know the words. I was like, what does that mean? And so then when I was doing the notes, I was like, which words did she look up? And there was only one that I that jumped out at me, and it was mordant. Was that one of the words?
Probably. Let's go through it, shall we? Let's see. Labidius?
Labidius?
Yeah, labidius. And then bilious.
Bilious, okay.
Bilious, bilious. And then there was a good portion where I didn't have any highlighted. And then peruke. And hoary, Hoary.
Huh.
And prurient, and spurious, and fungible.
All right.
And
many of those
Priapus.
are
Priapus. I was like, I'm sorry, what?
Oh, this is great. I love that. I mean, I think it's hilarious and wonderful that you took the time to find out what they meant. I did not. I just looked up hoary right now. It means grayish white. Or old and trite. And what a great word. So Scarlett, bravo. Some good vocabulary here.
Great vocabulary. But no, that's what I mean, is I was like, I'm picking up context clues.
Yeah.
Do I need to look up this definition to understand the passage? No. But is it so new to me that I should? Yes.
Well,
and I will say the Kindle makes it so easy.
Yeah.
I literally just tap the word and it gives me the definition, which, to be honest, I used to read for so long and never look up words, because I would physically have to look at the word, find a dictionary, find the word in the dictionary, hope that I had a big enough dictionary, Yeah.
So what did you think about this book overall, though? I am so curious to know.
I really was indifferent to it.
Really? Okay.
Really. It was steamy.
Mm-hmm.
That was for sure. And I did like those parts. I really enjoyed those parts. However, there was just I think what it was is I really didn't like the characters. I didn't like them in the slightest. Constance, I hate that, let me fix it, and I've done wrong to try and fix it, and then Mr. over there who just misinterprets everything because he's always in his own head, to the point where it even goes to the very end of the book. I was like, this is just stupid.
That's so funny, because I have such different opinions. Oh my goodness. But it's just interesting how we look at the same thing so differently. So my general thoughts are that I just love this book. I think it's super steamy, and I think that Scarlett does a really incredible job as someone who normally hates it when people have misunderstandings. I think every single time they have a misunderstanding, she backs it up with a fact of why they have that misunderstanding. That's pretty indisputable.
I did. That's because one thing I really dislike is that miscommunication thing. And I did like that it was backed up with stuff, and I did appreciate that. Those aspects I did appreciate, but it just was it took this giant ruination thing for both. Like, he's been in love with her for 8 years. They've been literally spending 5 of them together on a regular basis. And I'm just like, and in none of that time did you ever experience any personal growth? Like, it took this catalyst for you to actually have personal growth and development past, like, when you were both, like, in your own heads.
Oh, but I think their characters, totally... Their characters were in their own heads, and their characters were so true to their character. But
I don't think they experienced any growth. I think that they talked it out, but I don't think that it actually was a complete reckoning with the two of them. I think that they're just gonna do it again and again and again.
I totally disagree. I totally disagree.
And the fact that he literally had to be on death, he had to go put himself onto death's door because she was like, he won't ever forgive me.
That's the only way that they slowed down enough to talk to each other.
I know, but that's just stupid. I don't like that.
Oh my God, I loved it.
And it's because they were being dumb, the two of them. Oh,
no. I thought, I think she did this book perfectly. I think every moment there was I would get to that point where I would be almost angry and then I would be like, fuck, I have to agree with her. She wrote it so much that I was like, yep, this makes sense for these characters at this time. And I really I put a lot of those quotes in there because I felt like they were really important to trying to show in the story that those things were so crucial to those characters. And so that's why I included that quote at the end too, where they talk about their future together, what their children's names are going to be. And then Constance admits, all of her kind of insecurities, and he admits all of his insecurities. And it's that one line that I really think, honestly, is the reason. And it says, that they both can't believe how wrong the other person is about themselves. And so it's that line that to me sums up the whole everything and ties it together and gives it an absolutely ironclad reason for why it works and why it is good.
I think her writing is beautiful. And I really I understood where she was going with the point, and I understand why it was tied with the bow, but I just thought it was just so unnecessary. No, and I was reading it and I just was and it wasn't to the fact that I was angry or anything. I just was annoyed through the whole book. And I just was
oh, I'm so sorry.
There was they were holding me back. But the thing is, the characters themselves were holding me back because yes, I understood their reasoning behind it, but they were holding me back from truly embracing them.
All right, so let's get into these character ratings then. So who do you want to start with?
Let's start with him.
All right. So Julian, our poor misguided Julian. What do you give him?
A 4.
Oh my God.
No, I don't like him at all. I should preface that by saying, I like what his character represents. I like that he was this courtesan. I like that he was forced into circumstances. I loved the fact that we got that from a male point of view.
He wasn't forced either. He chose.
No, it wasn't forced.
Yeah.
He chose that. It was he was I'm doing this. I could do this for free, or I could make money at it. Let me make money at it.
And this is something I like.
Yeah. Good for him. Yeah. Good for him. I fully liked that. But the fact that he was this, he could be this kind, considerate person and just never extended that past it. As Master Damien, he was this kind, considerate person that helped others be who they truly were. And then in his actual life as Julian Haywood, he just was this luxury dude. And she wasn't the only one who thought of him that way. That was how everyone thought of him that way. And then he was I made bad choices. I need to be better. Poor me. No, I didn't like him.
Oh my God. So I felt like all of his development through the book was great. I love that he realized what an ass he had been. I love the way
that was good.
I love that, but it was more than that to me. It was I loved the way that she described that and how she really, to me, I thought he had such a journey. And I think it was really there's just this ebb and flow and this cadence to him and that kind of the dimensions of his personality, right? He'd been under lock for so long that he had locked himself in his own brain and he couldn't get out. And except for when he was, maybe Master Damien or maybe just he was so divided. He had his love for Constance, he had his outward appearance, and then he he had his sex life. And he kept those things so compartmentalized. And obviously it was a terrible idea. The other thing I think is interesting to note is that he is 25 and Constance is 21.
Oh,
they are young.
They're super young. I did have to do the math on that one. And, like, that makes way more sense, especially when he was like, I was just 18 and, like, this girl was 14. And it's like, whoa, you're too young.
Yeah.
And, like, my dad just died and left me with a ton of debt. Like,
and he ruined himself by making a terrible choice financially in the beginning. And he'd been working for 5 years. I feel like he had a reason. He was working for 5 years. He was helplessly in love with this girl, but he didn't want her to know. And he didn't want to make a fool out of himself over his love for her. And so he did the absolute wrong thing, but he really had no one to guide him. Come on. His dad
didn't
had
have anyone
died.
to guide him. But even after even after that situation, and, like, I get he was bad. But, like, throughout the whole thing, even after he, like, proposed marriage to her the first time being like, we should make it real. And then she was like, no, you're being silly. Like, I didn't feel like he actually, like, you know, she was the one that was like, let's just be in love the whole time. And, like, she was the one who kind of prompted that sort of, like, let's actually show our love for each other because, like, you're saying it, but I don't believe your actions. And, like, it just is like his awareness with other people was just like zero.
Well, I just didn't feel that at all. I felt like he had, like I said, had compartmentalized himself and that he had locked his opinions down so hard. But then the moment that he had all these inklings, like he started to allow the trust, but it wasn't something that he could just like turn off. He like started to make realizations. And I felt like his journey was really clear throughout the book. I give him a 9. I love him. He's hot. He's
Seriously?
sexy. He's fantastic.
A 9?
A 9. I love Julian.
Zoe.
I love Julian.
Dang. Nope. Mm-mm. You can have that opinion.
All right. So let's talk about Constance.
Constance, I felt like I'll give her slightly higher. 5 for being self-aware. That she realized she'd made a mistake and was like, I need to fix this mistake. Regardless of what I have to do to myself, like, I have to fix this because, like, I have literally ruined a man's life.
How great was that, too? Like, let's just talk for a second. How great it is when she's like, I've come to offer my hand in marriage. Like, that was such a good scene.
No, it was. So she gets, like, a 5. I just feel like... And again, I just didn't feel like her, like, I liked a lot of her traits and a lot of her qualities in the sense that, like, her backstory made a lot of sense and, like, she liked being who she was, which was kind of outrageous. But then, I don't know, I didn't feel, she didn't make, I guess there was, like, as a reader, I didn't actually feel the vulnerabilities. Like, Julian saw the vulnerabilities, but, like, she really didn't have in her own head those vulnerabilities that made me, like, feel compassionate for her. I don't know. There was just something about her. And then once again, I thought that the personal growth was minimal. And, like, yes, they're young, but I just felt the personal growth was minimal. And I just didn't like it.
All right.
And so I just couldn't get super behind her. There were pieces. It just wasn't there for me.
So I disagree about the personal growth, obviously. We looked at this book very differently. I felt, and I also disagree about her realization of herself. I think there were so many scenes where she let the reader know that she was extremely insecure and that she had built up all these walls and defenses. When it talks about her coming from England or from France to England and that whole, there's like a long passage about her like trying to turn herself into something so that she wouldn't, like her whole story of her rejection with Julian in the maze and how terrible that had made her feel as a young girl, and then going to France to be finished, and then like knowing that she had to make herself stronger so things like that wouldn't affect her. And it wasn't just that. It wasn't just a romantic relationship. It was relationships with her family, relationships with anybody. She'd been abandoned so many times. And so her natural defense was to be so wonderful that no one couldn't love her. And that to me was heartbreaking and also really, really relatable. And so I feel like for me, Lady Constance is such a reflection of so many of the personality traits that I myself am am ashamed of, or a lot of the time when I feel too much, you know, a lot of the things that she kind of said through the book about her feelings of people and trying to put on a show and all those things, they really resonated with me. And I appreciated that she made me look at my bad characteristics and start to be okay with them. And she did good things with those characteristics that I call bad in myself. And she's a 9 for me. I love her. I love her so much.
Well, you can enjoy her all you want.
Your face is so upset.
I mean, like, I get it. Like, I hear all of what you're saying and I see all of those moments, but for me, it didn't speak to me that way. Like,
and that's fair.
And that's all it was. It just didn't speak to me that way. And it's not anything, like, I will say, like, overall, the writing in this was beautiful. Like, the writing was beautiful. I thought the scenes were beautiful. I liked the vocab lesson I got. You know, like, I really did enjoy all of that. And I mean, like, plot-wise, it's definitely not the worst plot I've ever read, you know? And so there was a lot of factors, but as a whole, I couldn't get behind it. Like, I kind of read it, and I was like, I read it.
Oh my gosh. I'm so sad that you didn't have a good experience with it, because obviously, or didn't have a better experience with it, because obviously this is a book that I really love. But, I mean, that's kind of the interesting thing about books and reading.
Yes. And that's not to say, like, I'm intrigued by her other ones. Like, or she has a new one coming out, or it just came out, and I, like, you know, I almost started reading it. I just ended up doing other things.
Did you see who it's about?
I did, which is partly what I was intrigued about reading it.
Yeah. So
was because I was like, really? He gets a book?
Uh-huh. So I'm really excited. And I thought this was exciting because her new book, which is called The Lord I Left, came out about a week or two ago. And it is about Henry Evesham and another courtesan, shall we say, from Charlotte Street. So he's like real pious and kind of, you know, churchy. And she's
he's out to destroy vice, and she's out to, like, make money from it.
Yes. So I have heard a lot of really great reviews about that one. So that's the book that's, like, first on my not reading for fun list. Like, I really want to read it.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm definitely going to pick it up, and for sure.
So moving on, though, do you have a favorite quote from this book?
So my favorite quote is... Well, it says, "She rolled her eyes. Apthor, my dear, fretting about what is appropriate between us now is like worrying one does not have one's parasol whilst drowning in the ocean."
Nice. That's very cute.
I just thought that was very visual, and I just was like, that's how I felt about him, though. He's, like, always fretting about, like, it's like, dude, we're past that. We got to move on. There's bigger fish to fry.
So mine is just a simple line, and it's when her brother Archer finally finds her in the inn, and she is nursing Julian back to health, and he just comes in and he says, "Constance Louise Eleanor de Galascon be fucking Stonewell." And I laughed so hard at that.
I did too. That was a good one. It's such a brotherly thing. It's like, seriously?
Fucking Stonewell.
Yeah.
I loved it so much. All right. So now we have our steaminess rating and our encounter counter. So we had 5 encounters in this book, and I would rate this, and you can agree or disagree with me. I would say this is like some tea that maybe you poured a little brandy in because it had a little something extra.
I could agree with that one. I would agree with that one. Yeah.
It was real steamy.
Like a hot toddy situation kind of deal.
Yeah. Yeah, it was fun and different, and I really liked that. So then we get on to our feminist recap. And what do you think?
I would say it's pretty supporter. Like, no, I'd definitely say it's supporter. Like, all things aside, total supporter. Like, he is all about consent. He's all about making women feel wanted. He's all about making them feel beautiful. Like, Constance, you know, takes her trauma to try to help other women, you know, and she is blatantly saying, like, I totally think this is unfair for women. Like, yes, very clearly. So,
well, and I think it's more
100% supporter.
Yeah. And I think it goes a lot further than that because she really makes, sorry, what were you going to say?
I would say a perfect representation, at least for me, was like, at the beginning when Julian thinks that Constance has probably had lovers before and that she's not a virgin. And he's like, but who am I to judge? I'm not a virgin. Like, I couldn't judge her for that. That would be stupid of me.
Yeah, he's extremely open-minded, which is great, you know, sexually open-minded. Obviously, he like was nitpicky on her and like trying to make her fit societal norms on the outside. And so there was that, but that was misguided in my opinion. But I think it goes more and like, you know, just feminism kind of be like thinking the concept meaning like that we believe that everyone should have kind of the same rights, right? That's the whole idea of feminism. And I think that this book goes really far in like non-kink shaming and also just like talking about like kink and about, you know, different things that different people enjoy, but like in an extremely positive way. And I love that. Like it doesn't shy away from any of that stuff. And I really appreciate Scarlett for doing that and being out there and like really loud about that. I think that's important. I don't think a ton of people do that in this genre, just because I think that there are maybe less books that I've seen in historical romance that feature BDSM. So I think like it's really cool. And I really liked what she did with it. And I thought it was super feminist.
100% agree.
So now, here we are at the end of our journey together.
I
think we're going to be on different islands on this one. But what would you rate this book?
I'm going to give it a 4.5.
Okay, well, I'm going to give it a 9. So I'm just going to double your 4.5. But do you want to talk about why?
I think I've kind of reiterated it. It's just
it's not for you.
The writing, it's just not for me. Like there just was something about it that just didn't click. And for me, and I will say for me, mainly it's characters. Like I just couldn't jive with these characters. Things about them bothered me, and it just never quite, like, we'd get to a point, I'd be like, hallelujah, we're getting to a point, and then they'd just, like, knock it down like a cat on a shelf, and I just was like, seriously?
It
was just kind of my feeling through the whole thing, and I just was over it.
Well, I'm so sorry that you felt that way, but I loved this book. I love that Scarlett made me like something that normally I hate. And to me, that's a mark of something really great, because I had the opposite feeling where like every time something got knocked down, I felt like maybe it wasn't them knocking it down. It was some other circumstance or like a gusty wind that kind of like knocked over something that was already in such a delicate balance. And so for me, I remember this book. I remember the characters, and I have so much fun reading it. So
I figured out why it bothered me.
What? Why?
It was because like they had all these external forces, which were kind of like, you know, the plot, the driving together thing that was bringing them together, all these external forces, but their internal, like the trope of their own misunderstandings being the thing that was like the actual thing getting, like it wasn't any of the obstacles outside the relationship that were getting in the way of them being together. It was literally themselves. And the thing is, I can only handle that like a couple times in a book. I can't handle it through the whole book. And it was the whole book, Zoe.
But I didn't think
whole book.
But I didn't think it was themselves each time. I think that it was so many other circumstances of years of
years of themselves being dumb.
No. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I just disagree. I see it very differently. And I loved this book, and I can't wait to read the next one. And I have actually read the first one, which I believe is about her brother and his wife. But I don't remember much of it. So, oh my gosh, I get to read another one of her awesome books. And not only do we have The Lord I Left maybe to look forward to, but we also later this year have a book of hers that we talked about in our 2020 historical romances we just can't wait for. So that book is The Regency, and that comes out later this year. So I'm looking forward to that.
I'm looking forward to that one as well. And what are we reading next time?
Well, next time we have a Galentine's Day special for everyone. So we're doing an episode devoted to the greatest gal pals of historical romance.
Oh, yeah. And we got some listener suggestions, which was excellent because Zoe, if you are interested in seeing those suggestions, I believe they're tagged on the Instagram?
Yeah, they're on a highlight.
They're highlighted on the Instagram. And I will say they are great. I was checking him, and I'd be like, and then Zoe was like, I've never heard of this one. And I was like, oh, Zoe.
So it's going to be fun. We're going to get to tell each other about some books too. I can't wait. So thank you for listening. Join us next time as we talk about all the greatest gal pals of historical romance.
And may all your ever afters end happily.
Tea and Strumpets is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. The better preventing of clandestine marriage. Clandestine? Clandestine?
I think that's a personal preference.
All right.
But I would be totally unsurprised if I was wrong.
And was popularly known as... I'm going to leave that there because what am I going to say? It was a really cool book.
Yeah, it was a really cool book, guys.
Cool book.
It's a really cool book.
He felt her breath quicken at the light pressure of his fingers on her wrists. He smoothed her pulse points with his thumb. Because it hurts my feelings.
I love that.
I know,